Alrighty. So again, hello, hi. Thank you so much for taking the time to meet with us today for Reach Out and Read Illinois' March 2026 webinar on engaging fathers in early childhood. My name is Olivia Heinzeroth. I use she, her pronouns, and I am the Senior Program Manager of Reach Out and Read here in Illinois, underneath the Illinois chapter of the American Academy of Pediatrics. Today, I have the honor to be joined by Dr. Craig Garfield and Michael Hampton, and we're going to navigate the conversation of how to engage fathers in early childhood. And we really are excited for today's session. If you feel inclined to, please share in the chat your name as well as what clinic you're affiliated with if you are, or how you came to be a part of today's session. We really think that today's content will be very applicable to many people in many different walks of life. But with that, I'll go ahead and start with my introduction of our speakers. So today I am joined by Dr. Craig Garfield. He is a professor of pediatrics and of medical social sciences at Northwestern University's Feinberg School of Medicine, as well as a practicing pediatrician at the Lurie Children's Hospital of Chicago. In 2020, he became the founder and director of the Family and Child Health Innovations Program, or FCHIP, which focuses on how to support families in all their diversity and is buoyed in by the notion that children thrive when families thrive. Career highlights include contributing to the scientific evidence of the dad bod, authoring all three of the AAP's statements on father and pediatrics in collaboration with the CDC to create the first ever public health surveillance system for fathers, called PRAMS for Dads. In 2025, Dr. Garfield was honored as a thinker in residence at Deakin University in Australia. Dr. Garfield is also joined by Michael Hampton. He is a community affairs specialist of family learning FAST programs at the Center of Literacy through University of Illinois at Chicago. Michael is a community advocate for fathers throughout the city of Chicago and is also the lead training facilitator for the 24/7 Dads program through the National Fatherhood Initiative program. He has been leading the male involvement department at the UIC Center for Literacy FAST for 15 plus years. And throughout that time, he has been able to implement a variety of ideas and strategies to not only promote and increase male involvement, but also figuring out how to support and help fathers navigate through some of the most challenging events that come against being successful within fatherhood. Michael brings a lot of personal experience as he's an active father of two boys, 15 and 22 himself. And he is a huge believer that the more access and resources fathers have to being engaged early, the more you will see fathers engaged throughout the child's lifetime. So again, I would like to thank you both so much for taking the time to meet with us today. Today's session will be more of an interactive conversation with the two of you, really highlighting your work and how your approach with working with fathers has evolved throughout your time in this work and all that kind of stuff. Would you both like to add anything before we get started?
No, thank you.
Thank
Looking
you.
forward
Thank
to
you,
it.
Olivia.
Perfect.
Real
All right,
good.
with that, that brings us to our first conversation, which is a very, very broad question. And I defer to the both of you on why is it important to center fathers in early childhood?
You want to take that mic off the top?
Yeah, I'll take that off the top, Dr. Garfield. Again, good morning, audience. Good afternoon, audience. Uh, I think it's very, very important in today's time to send up fathers in early childhood. Because when you think about it, when you think about the whole perspective of early childhood, you usually think of moms. You usually see moms at the forefront of that when it comes to education, when it comes to nurturing young children at that early childhood level. It's always, mom. And so I think, centering fathers in early childhood, you immediately help fathers identify their roles and their values, the value that they bring to the family structure. Engaging fathers early, I also think help ease the tension, of access and permission to be engaged with a child on an early childhood level. A lot of fathers, seem, reluctant or hesitant at that early childhood level, to be, or to have that access or permission to that access to be engaged in that particular kind of way with a child that early. I believe it also helps fathers become more comfortable with the nurturing side that comes along with parenting at an early childhood level. And most fathers prefer to wait. When you think about it, most fathers kind of prefer to wait until the child kind of fully develop or develop somewhat into that mid age 4, 5, 3 before he starts to serious engage. And I think when you look at it, centering fathers early that's something that becomes really important because fathers wait such a uh, nice amount of time from 0 to 3 or 4 because they don't feel they have that access or permission before that age, that age range comes. And so we want to engage way before then. So I think centering fathers early, allows fathers to feel more confident that they can have that access and permission that early. Another thing, I think it also helps the child begin to see mom and her role as well as dad and his role. And it also gives the child the confidence to trust dad in his role as dad continues to develop and be engaged in that child life throughout that child's lifetime.
I would echo a lot of what Michael was just saying too. And I do I'm a pediatrician. I do a lot of my clinical work now in the neonatal intensive care unit. But I also have been doing a lot of research on the role of fathers over the years. And I'd say there's three really important reasons why centering fathers in early childhood helps families. One is it's important for children. We know from the research that uh, children with involved fathers have advanced language development, particularly expressive language development. Their physical development is further along too, and this is actually regardless of marital status of the couple, but having an involved dad, that play and what's called rough and tumble play, which is generally a very father-centric type of behavior is beneficial for children. So there's a lot of research that points to um, dads being able to kind of take a child at whatever age they are and play with them on the ground, rough and tumble play, and it actually is similar to what you see when you have lions in the wild, right? That they'll have a cub who's playing around. Then the cub does something like a little bit too much, and the lion just grabs them or swats them or pushes them. And what happens when dads do this type of play is that they change the rules for the child, and then that child learns how to adapt, right? And starts to build what a lot of the researchers believe is kind of a resiliency and an adaptation, and a way that they can interact with their environment in a safe way. Dad's keeping the child safe, but is actually changing the ways and the rules as they're playing, which is really helpful for brain development. So it's important for children, is number one. Number two, it's really important for mothers too. We know that having an engaged father improves both pre and postnatal care for moms. It improves the likelihood to initiate and continue breastfeeding, and it also can be beneficial for mom's mental health. And then, so you have important for the child, important for the mom. And then the last one, which is kind of a newer area in fatherhood research, is it's actually beneficial for dads. And we did a number of interviews with fathers actually in Chicago and Milwaukee. We did some qualitative interviews with over 35 of them, asking them what was the impact of becoming a father? How did that affect your health and well-being? And so, as pediatricians, these are important things because families are units, right? And so, if someone is not well in a particular unit, that's going to impact all the individual members of that unit too. And what we heard from those dads when we interviewed them was that and these were largely lower educated, lower income dads. They said that after their baby was born, they wanted to be there. And that was their term. They wanted to be there. They wanted to be there when their baby entered kindergarten. They wanted to be there when the baby finished elementary school and went to middle school. They wanted to be there and watch their baby grow. And for many of these men, this was the first time that they had like a purpose or a reason to do that. And that's, I think, one of the huge reasons, as Mike was saying, getting in early, helping to build that confidence actually has dads thinking about, oh, I want to be there. I need to take care of myself. I need to think about my physical health and my mental health. So all these are really important things for child health, mother's health, dad's health, and that transition time is really key. Some research has shown that the more dads are involved early on after the birth of the child, if they take longer family leave, which in this country we don't have very long family leave, but those dads who are able to take about more than 2 weeks of paternity leave in one form or another, they are much more, 3 times more likely to be involved when their baby is 9 to 12 months old in things like diapering, clothing, bathing, feeding, putting to sleep. So that investment in the beginning has a huge payoff down the road for the child, for the dad, and for the family as well. And then the last thing I'll just say is that from a mental health perspective, we did a really interesting study in the NICU. And again, as we're all pediatricians on this call, thinking about the health of the family and the mental health, we focus a lot on maternal mental health, but kind of coming up now is a lot of discussion around paternal mental health and how these things both affect individuals, the mom or the dad, but affect one another as well. So we did a study in the neonatal intensive care unit where we had moms and dads spit into a tube. And we were measuring cortisol. So we were measuring the stress hormone cortisol when they were in the NICU and then after they went home. And no one had ever done it in dads before. And as Michael's opening comment that we really think more about moms in this area, we wanted to change that. So we wanted to measure the salivary cortisol of mothers and fathers when they were in the NICU and then after they'd been home after a while, after being discharged with a very low birth weight infant. And it really is like kind of a microcosm of what might be happening in families that you might take care of in your practices now. And what we found is that when the mom spit into the tube, we saw that when they were in the NICU, their cortisol levels were high. And when they went home, they remained high. Okay. With the dads, they actually were at the same level the moms in the NICU. Their cortisol levels were high. And when they went home, and again, no one had looked at this before, so we didn't know this data. Their cortisol levels in their saliva, showing that they were physiologically stressed, went higher, right? They were actually much higher than the moms. And so what we hypothesized is that in the NICU, which is obviously a different situation, but we can think about that for the families that we take care of. Things are kind of under control. And then you get home with a new baby. And for a dad, you're trying to take care of your baby. You're trying to take care of your partner and help her. You're trying to take care of yourself, and you're probably back at work because we don't have good policies that support families. So I mentioned that because when we asked them to also fill out pen and paper surveys, moms filled out surveys that showed that if their cortisol was high, if their physiologic stress was high, their survey questions correlated. So, I am feeling stressed and my cortisol is high. Dads, it didn't work like that. Dads were physiologically stressed with their cortisol levels, but they were not endorsing the surveys as well. And I think there's one lesson we can take away from that, that dads may not be in touch with that feeling. And these may be dads that are coming into your offices now to be thinking about how is it for them as they have transitioned into fatherhood? How is it having a new baby? It's stressful for everybody. But if you feel like you're a dad and you aren't supported, no one's asking how you're doing. No one's aware of kind of the stress that you're trying to balance between the different roles and the changes in your roles. We're really missing an opportunity in pediatrics. So I think for all those reasons, it's really important to center fathers in early childhood.
Absolutely. And I think you both really hit a really important aspect too, is that language has power with these conversations too. And if we are just in tune to having this maternal centric conversation, we might be leaving a very active role. We are leaving a very active role out of the conversation. And so I do want to take that and kind of transition into our next question, which is really about the role of fathers in your work specifically. So how your work centers fathers, maybe what you're doing to include fathers in the conversation, advance the role of the father as we move forward into the future of childhood and early childhood.
Sure, I'll take that away, Dr. Garfield.
Right.
And so again, I'm currently a lead facilitator with the UIC Center for Literacy, facilitator of the 24/7 DADS program. Over at CFL, what we try to do in our father engagement program is we try to help, meet fathers where they are. And we try to help fathers see the importance of their role and the value that they bring into the family structure. And we just try to, again, meet them where they are. So when they come into our centers, we try to figure out what their needs are. One, how can we best help serve you and support you so that you feel that confidence and that you feel that value into the family structure. And so, if that's going back to school, if that's anger management, if that's custody issue, if that's um, parenting, parenting training. We try to figure out what those needs are, and then we can start to identify what services are best for you. Um, if you are a parent that's in the household, if you're a father that's in the household, but maybe you don't know how to be engaged with a child at an early level, maybe, teaching math to an early child or teaching a young child to write or teaching a young child ABCs, and you need to be rebrushed back up on those skills yourself to be able to engage with that child at that early childhood level. We provide you trainings and workshops in those areas. If it's a parenting issue that you may have, and you may just need different techniques and strategies to incorporate into your parenting, whether that's communicating effectively, whether that's navigating through some of your own traumas and past experiences of parenting, and how in a positive way or maybe negative way, how you may be bringing some of those experiences into your own parenting and the way that you parent. Maybe it's discipline and maybe needing strategies on effective disciplining, or just seeing how understanding how children grow and develop over time. And so, if those are issues for the father, then we help meet the father there. That's where we offer those 6 week training, 24/7 dad training courses to help fathers identify those needs and be able to develop on those strengths of parenting. And so we just try to meet them where they are and provide them resources that will help them be confident in that role within the family structure.
So I'll kind of address this question first, just from a personal story. When I finished my residency, and this was a while ago, and finished training in Boston and was moving back here uh, for my wife to start her pediatric training at that then Children's Memorial. I spent a year at home before I was going to a fellowship program at University of Chicago. And I spent that year at home because we had an 18-month-old, and I had talked a lot about being a parent and what it's like to parent a kid, but I never really had as a pediatric resident. And so I was kind of looking forward to that experience. And it really informed everything that I did from that point forward, was to be at home as a stay-at-home dad. I still did little clinical moonlighting in here and there to keep up skills, but most of my focus was on our son at that particular point. And I was, a white male doctor and had the highest social capital out there. Um, and yet I still felt very much on the outside. And I think a lot of dads feel that way, particularly in the places that dads and families are, because, as we've been talking about, they often are women and mother centric and mother focused in particular. But that kind of experience really taught me a lot about um, dads who do want to be involved. And again, the data shows that since 1965, when they first started looking at kind of time in the home child rearing, dads have more than tripled the amount of time that they're spending with kids in their home. It still is really important to note that moms do the lion's share of work with the children, but dads are increasing, and they're looking for, as Michael was talking about, what is my role here? How can I contribute? And they may not feel comfortable, they may not feel confident, but one secret that I talk to dads all the time clinically is like, guess what? Mom also doesn't really know what she's doing most of the time. And so like but she does, the buck stops with her. So it's like really saying to her, like, give it a try, just try something out and see if that particularly works. So from a research side, again, because I spent a lot of time doing research, um, we kind of look at it at kind of three different circles. One is like kind of a community organization level, one is in a healthcare system, and then the other is kind of public policy and public health level. So we really have been working on trying to understand more about fathers from fathers, and where the best inroads we might get to encourage that engagement and to support them in their role. So, for example, I've done both expectant fathers groups and NICU dads groups, because I think many dads are not sure what they've gotten themselves into. It isn't very real for them that their partner is pregnant until the baby actually comes for many dads. And so it's really talking to them about, here are some things that are going to happen. Here are some ways to open up communication now before the baby even comes, because once the baby comes and nobody's sleeping, communication becomes really, really important and harder to establish. So starting at the very beginning about what you're excited about, what you're nervous about, and really hearing from both of them, because most moms will get a lot of important attention about how they're doing. They're starting to show people on the street are talking to them about their pregnancy, right? Dads, you would have no clue. No one's asking them about it at work, like maybe friends and family are asking, but they're really saying like, how is she doing? And so we work a lot in the NICU, and any dads I work with, like, how are you doing? And trying to think about that from the dad's perspective. We just did a study that just got accepted where we're using the newborn nursery time period, which is a busy time for babies, right? Because pediatricians are running in and out, checking them out. Busy time for moms because their OB is following up on them. But it's actually can be a relatively quiet time for dads. So we wanted to look into, could you recruit dads in the newborn nursery to watch some high value short videos about key child development things like safe sleep, like car seat safety, mental health, depression. Would dads be willing to be recruited in the newborn nursery, watch the videos, and would they remember the information? And it turns out the dads are actually really excited to participate. These are like, finally, someone's talking to me. So they were more than happy to watch the videos. They enjoyed the videos. They knew a lot about the things that we were asking them about, particularly around car seat safety. But they didn't know as much about safe sleep, breastfeeding, or mental health. And then a month later, when we followed up with them, that knowledge had dropped off a little bit. So one of the conclusions was there needs to be some easy way for dads to get a booster of that information down the road. It really is going to come from your offices to the folks that are listening. I think that's really an important piece as we think about how to include dads. And then from a kind of public health, higher level health perspective, we created the what's called PRAMS for Dads. So the PRAMS study is the Pregnancy Risk Assessment Monitoring System that the CDC has run for almost 40 years until this past January when the CDC demolished that entire division. So we had been asked by CDC a number of years ago to build something that would respond to dads. And so we thought along and hard about it. We interviewed a lot of dads in the community, a lot of moms in the community to say like, what do you think if your partner was asked about, his role as a father and his health and well-being? So all the measures that we ask about moms, about their health and well-being around the perinatal period had not been asked of anyone, of any of the dads before. So we built that, we piloted it in the state of Georgia in 2018, and now we have 9 different states that are all in the field doing this, including actually Japan is also fielding the survey. So we have over 10,000 dads surveyed at this point. It's the largest collection of perinatal paternal public health. And that information is really missing. It's a big gap that we have. And that's one major way that we end up centering dads in the work that we're doing. That then trickles into the policy piece, which is, and Olivia mentioned this in the beginning, that we will be soon, hopefully, we're working on the third American Academy of Pediatrics policy statement on fathers and pediatrics. And just one very brief story on that. The first time we did this, which was back in 2006, we wrote the clinical report, and they one thing we said was screen dads for their mental health, right, for postpartum depression from dads. And the comment we got back in the review process was that doesn't that disorder doesn't exist for dads. You can't just make it up and start, screening dads for things like that. So we backpedaled and we said, all right, well, let's just say, talk with dad about how his transition to fatherhood is going. Because it wasn't until a couple years later there actually was a study in the Lancet that showed postpartum depression in dads really does exist, and the prevalence is between 5 and 10%. So now in this third version, we actually have a huge section on dad's mental health, so much so that we're pulling off a separate policy statement calling for universal screening of partners, whoever that might be, at the 4 month visit. And so that's something that we're slowly working through with a lot of feedback from pediatricians like you in the community to think about what does that really look like? What does it mean if I now, we all agree we should be screening moms. Should we be screening dads? What does that look like? How does that work actually in a busy clinic like you guys are all in? And how can we actually do that in a safe, confidential way for the whole family? So those are kind of the ways that we center our work from the very kind of grassroots in the community on the way all the way up to kind of public health and public policy.
Absolutely. Thank you both so much. And I think that's a great segue into our next question. And I think you both have touched on this a few different times in a few different ways, but really making that space and carving it out for fathers because in traditional fatherhood roles that they're probably still upholding even subconsciously, they're not really making space for themselves in the conversation. So it's really important and integral for us to make space for them at the table with that conversation. And so I'd really like to take a moment to talk about what practical advice you have for those that work with early childhood in any way, shape, or form to make space for fathers and include them in the conversation and really encourage that active role for them from that early childhood and beyond. Because as you keep saying, that early stage really is an integral part of their success as that active father role throughout the duration of their time as a parent. So yeah, again, any practical advice you have, and then maybe even including maybe some misconceptions or challenges that have appeared in your work that you'd like to address through this conversation too.
Sure. Want me to go first, Michael, this
Yeah,
time?
yeah,
Give
absolutely.
you a little bit of a break there.
Yeah, absolutely.
Um,
Um, I think as Dr. Garfield has mentioned many times, I think, it's this preconceived notion is that, fathers are just not involved or not wanting to be involved. And I think, and I'll start there. I think that's the biggest myth in my work that I have saw or seen to date is fathers just not wanting to be involved. A lot of times, I think it's just the not knowing how to be engaged and involved as well as different barriers. Sometimes not being in the household with the child, co-parenting with mom, education level of dad, time and balance that dad has between work and being able to provide and actually being able to be involved. And so I think when you break down a lot of different factors of of how dads are being engaged or not. I think the biggest myth is that they just not want to, and that's totally not true. And so I think in terms uh, of making it making things more accessible for fathers. I think access and allowing fathers that time and that space really do works wonders. And so I would say for centers, being welcoming, just be as flexible as you possibly can. With scheduling meetings. Consider hosting meetings or events around fathers' schedules. One thing that I always mention to sites that I work with and partners that I work with, make your environment very, 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 very welcoming to fathers. And so what that mean is, if you are a daycare site or a site that have fathers coming in and out, make sure that it's pictures of fathers and children around the site. If it's not a daycare and let's just say it's a clinic office and things like that, make sure that you have pictures of just random father and children, but make sure that that when fathers walk in, they see that visibility because I can tell you for a as a parent, when I walked in those spaces, as a young father, and I walked into the clinics, I walked into the schools, and when I saw pictures of fathers and children and things like that, that made me feel welcome. That made me feel as though I had access, and that made me feel as though the place that I was in value, the relationship between fathers and children. So be more intentional in that way, I would say. Uh, Direct outreaching, I would say, when you have conversations with moms and as well as dads, but a lot of times when it comes to providing clinical information, medical appointments, things like that, even relaying school information, a lot of times that go directly to mom and mom's email and mom's voicemail. but we want to make sure that you include dad as well. Make sure that you're being intentional about receiving dad's information, his email, his phone number, his contact, and that way you're communicating simultaneously with both. That type of inclusion just gives fathers more confident that they have the access and permission, to be involved and engage in these different ways.
Those are great. I really appreciate those comments, Michael. And I think there's such sometimes little things that are going to make a difference for that dad. And they will tell you later when you're doing like their adolescence visit or something like that. They'll be like, when my baby was first born, you looked at me and I knew I was supposed to be part of this team, and that makes a big difference. And I think a lot of the kind of practical advice that I have mirrors a lot of what Michael was saying. It's also funny to be on a call with my wife who kind of calls out things in the chat. But I think the first thing is self-reflection as clinicians to think about how do we welcome families into the clinical space. And it starts in the newborn nursery. When we go in the room and we really want to find out what's happening with the baby, how's breastfeeding going, those sort of questions. And dad's kind of sitting off in his own chair on the phone, right? Or sleeping because it's been a late night having a baby. And if we don't kind of pause, turn our body, address them, use our body language to say, I want to hear from you, and pause to let them actually share what they're going through, then we've kind of lost them, right? And they'll go back to their phone, or in the bigger picture, they'll just go back to work and be like, I don't know if there was a recent New York Times story about some influencer person who's like, I don't think dads should be involved until the kids are like 4 years old. They don't have any role. And I was like, that is completely wrong. They have a huge role from the very beginning. We just need to acknowledge that and welcome them into the space. So, doing some self-reflection on how we as clinicians engage with the non-birth partner or whatever whoever else is also involved in raising that kid, and think about our own attitudes and experiences. That we come into this work with our own biases, and it's important to recognize those and acknowledge them. Not everyone came from a family where A, there was a dad, or B, that dad was a positive influence in that family. So are we bringing that into the work and just being aware of that, of any sort of kind of intersectional biases that may shape the care that we're providing? And then I think it's really thinking from the front door all the way through in our practices. How can we actively invite fathers? So Michael had some ideas there. You can make sure that the dad's contact information is included in the chart, because oftentimes there's only just the mom there, so she's getting all the phone calls. You can do this at schools too, right? So that moms have an overwhelming burden of taking care of all the details for that child, and the society just keeps putting it on mom. But all the dads that we've done research on want to be involved, but they just aren't included. So if you can think about making sure that that information is included in the chart, and thinking about, is it realistic for dads to make it to these appointments? Illinois has some laws on the books that allow parents to take time off of work to be able to attend doctor's visits. So that's something to remind dads about. If dads aren't there, and again, it's really important for families that you have employed parents. So if they're not able to make it to our, 10 a.m. appointment on a Wednesday, asking mom about how's it going at home? How's the support that she's getting? And reminding her to there's this term in the research world called gatekeeping, where oftentimes it describes moms who don't want dad to do something because they're not going to do it right. They can do it quicker. They're better at it. They don't want to bother him, whatever the case may be. But reminding them that the more the dad is involved in the beginning, the more confident they feel. That if there's a way for that dad even to diaper and diaper wrongly, well, you learn. If you put the diaper on wrong and there's a leak, you're going to probably not do that again next time, but you wouldn't know that if you weren't given the primary responsibility of taking care of that kid. So I always like to say, dads get in early and often, let them make their mistakes, learn from them without someone over their shoulder, and then they'll build the confidence that comes with spending time with the child. Um, and if you do have a dad in there, in the same way that we think about mom and kind of what are her resources, thinking about those social determinants of health and those ACEs and the cultural expectations and what resources they have available to them and what resources they might be missing. Thinking about that from the dad's perspective, I think is really useful. And it just starts with the conversation. You'd be surprised when you turn to dad and you give them your attention, and you say, "How is it going for you?" How much they're willing to open up to you. And people always say, "Oh, men won't talk." I actually find the opposite. Often they won't stop talking once you get them going, and they really do want what's best for this child. And so let's take advantage of that, right? Let's say, great, let me tell you some things. One of the best things you can do, and I say this to dads all the time, one of the number one best things you can do for your kid is read to them. Doesn't matter what book, doesn't matter if you're following the words or not, like just getting them engaged in that. So why I think Reach Out and Read is so important in actually putting books into the hands of parents so that they know and you model for them how to be engaged in that particular way. And that's going to pay off dividends down the road in terms of reading and schooling and things like that. And then from a real practical perspective of breastfeeding support, letting dads know. I've had dads in my expectant dad classes say, um, they tell me I'm supposed to go to a breastfeeding class. Why? I'm not going to breastfeed the baby. And I'm like, you're right, you're not going to, but you have probably one of the second most important after mom's decision is your decision to support and help that mom with breastfeeding. So teaching them a little bit about breastfeeding, how they can be helpful, how eventually they can be giving pumped breast milk bottles, and that can really help mom. And feeling like that's a special time for the dad to be involved with their baby and their child is really, really useful. And finally, I think, for those of you who are on the call who might be working different kind of circles and things like that, if there's any way to kind of advocate for public family family policies and public policy ads, I think is really important. So if there's ways to champion family leave that's paid family leave, that I think is just one of the most important things we can be doing right now for our families, and modeling things off of different sorts of programs that they have abroad that do a really great job of making sure dads are feeling engaged from the very beginning and not when their kid is 4 years old. I think is really important. And pediatricians can play a big role in advocating for those sorts of things.
Absolutely. Incredible, incredible advice. I really think that there's some actionable items in the things that you've shared that could be easily practiced today at the very least, if not in the future too. And I think that really is a good segue into our final question for the day before we open it up to audience questions. But if we do all of this work right, if we get all of this work right, what are some of the benefits for fathers, children, and for families if we start centering fathers and centering them early in the conversation?
Well, I think we've heard this pretty much throughout the segue today, but you just continue to instill that confidence, right? That access, that welcoming for fathers, and I think that continues to be huge, as they continue to try to navigate and figure out that way to be engaged early. Um, I think the benefits for children, and Dr. Garfield has hit on this numerous times throughout today as well. Higher academic achievement for children. That goes without saying, and that's with the combination of both parents. But especially having dad be engaged early. In that educational standpoint. Definitely promotes that. Better emotional, social development, better navigating through challenges and the challenges of life and the challenges that they have at their development stage, being better able to navigate through those emotions. Lower behavioral issues, with fathers being engaged early helps to, lower some of those tantrums and, act out, that kids usually have. So it lowers that behavioral risk or that behavioral issue. One of the biggest things or the biggest benefits that I believe that children have is that children have from having fathers engaged early is that children start to grow with a sense of security. And then Dr. Garfield, you mentioned this in the very beginning with the lion and the cub example. And I love that because mom do things in different ways and dad do things in different ways. And even in how we parent and how we see the world, the things that we value. It's all different, even the makeup and characteristics of man and woman is different. And so we all see things different, in between those lenses, between man and woman, we see things different. And so um, I think it gives children a sense of security and provides a sense of exploration that the father allows that child to do and to experience, and throughout that, the child starts to see their world and the world around them differently, and how they kind of navigate through those challenges, from those experiences in ways that dad allows that to naturally take place in ways mom may or may not. And so that's one of the biggest benefits that I think for children is amongst many other benefits, but I think that's a good one. Benefits for families. I believe 100% that it promotes stronger partnerships between mom and dad. I think shared parenting duties and having dad engage early helps reduce stress on the family. And it also helps to improve the relationship between mom and dad. And so I think there's benefits there for the family. Better balance and health for dad. As I said earlier, one of the biggest myths is, dad's just not wanting to be involved. And so when you involve them early and you give them that welcome and that access early, they start to, they see themselves in this role. And that's encouraging to them. That's encouraging to their health. That's encouraging to their everyday being of waking up wanting to accomplish that task and be successful at that task of fatherhood every single day. And so they have that sense of value, that sense of presence, that I belong here in this role and doing, and I'm also confident that I can be successful in this role. And so that's better to their health, because all fathers, want to be successful in that way when it comes to fatherhood and being a dad. Better economic stability for the family. I think when you encourage dads early, dads are more likely to, stick and stay around throughout the duration of that child's lifetime. And so that adds more economic stability to the family. And through research, when dad is involved throughout a lifetime, that reduces the poverty risk, of that child or that family. And so, with dad being involved early, that definitely provides that, that economic stability. And so I think in the long run, just having engaged fathers lead to, better long-term life outcomes, higher educational attainment, lower risks of, teenage pregnancy amongst girls, and also a lower risk of drug use amongst children in general. And so it's a really, really big benefit to engage fathers early, and there's many, many benefits that it has on the dad himself, the children, as well as the whole overall family structure.
I, I mean, everything Michael said was right on target. And if you had a pill that you could give someone for all those outcomes, everyone would want that pill, right? So if all it is it helping and encouraging dads to be involved, and you have all these improved outcomes, like why aren't we doing that more? Why aren't we kind of changing the way that we provide care, the way that we think about families, that we think about children? And maybe just a couple of things to touch on from what Michael said about, if we get this right, like what are the benefits? They're huge benefits. We can support more families and support families in all the diversity that they are, right? So one of the things that's important to realize is that, and Michael said this earlier, that fathers want to be involved. They're not always sure how to be involved, or even don't. Many men, I mean, it's a joke, men don't like to ask for directions. Like, they're not going to really also feel very comfortable always asking for, like, what do I do with this baby? Like, but no, recognizing that there are certain people in their world who they are comfortable asking questions to or willing to entertain questions from them. Pediatricians and pediatric providers are one of those group, and I think we should take advantage of that by engaging dads and saying, what's your top question for the week? Like, what have you been scratching your head about your baby? They have those questions, but oftentimes, like we've said, people don't always ask them what they're thinking about. Um, and even thinking about the diversity of families in families, and we could do a whole session on this, but on no, non-cohabiting or non-residential fathers, the research shows pretty strongly that those dads are involved with their kids. They may not be sleeping over with them, they may not be in kind of a married couple, but they do actually see their child, and they see their child pretty frequently. So don't discount an non-cohabiting or unmarried couple and think, well, that dad's never going to be around, because it's really not true. And that dad also still wants what's best for that child. And that's where we as pediatricians can kind of come in. Um, if we do this right, it should make things easier for moms down the road. And I think that's a should be a big selling point of like, look, if you can get the dad to feel comfortable with doing any of these things, giving a bottle of breast milk, taking care of the baby and feeding, bathing, clothing, that sort of thing, that should reduce some of the burden on moms. And we know that moms are extremely overburdened at this point. Um, and then the last thing is the economic entry that Michael was just talking about. Like, not only is it beneficial for the dad to be engaged, to kind of to be there and support the family as well, but oftentimes it's the dad who's opening up doors. It changes a little bit now, but who's opening up doors down the road for that child's entry into the workforce down the road for their own economic and educational advancement. So if we can be sure that dads are involved and feel supported and empowered to be with their children in the educational spheres, in the economic spheres, in the healthcare world, then I think we're going to end up having better benefits for dads, moms, and the family altogether.
Absolutely. So that's the end of the proposed questions. I think we have a few minutes here where we can open up to audience Q&A. But to get started with that, I do have a question that I've kind of been thinking about throughout your talks today. And what can providers and like I don't mean just medical providers, I mean like providers as well as daycare facility providers and things like that. What can they do, do you think, to include working parents more in the conversation? Because we touched on that a little bit, how in the state of Illinois it is in law you can attend these appointments and things like that, but knowing that is the first battle. And so what do you think practically those roles should be doing to try and include working parents more in the conversation and as an active participant in their child's life?
I can take this one first, Michael, if that's all right.
Yeah, yeah.
Um, I think we first have to recognize that even though the parent isn't there, they still are thinking about and concerned about their child and would love to hear about their child and how they're doing. So, and again, my perspective is a lot more from the healthcare system, and particularly in a NICU. Parents may not be there, right? Because their baby's been there for a while and they have to be at work. So, for working parents, it is, I think, fighting public policy so that they can be involved as much as they want to be. That's one important piece. But then also thinking about how to be creative about the uses of technology. Like, can you FaceTime in with them during their break? Can you send them a text message? Can you send them a video message of, hey, here's how your child's doing. Here's the update. Please call me when you do have time. Because you don't want to put a parent in between their child and their ability to have a job and hold a job. And I think that that's really important for families for their ultimate success.
I could just piggyback to that, Dr. Garfield. I think you really, really hit it there, and where I would go. I think dads in particular, parents in general, are always in this constant battle of providing, but also making time for, school, not just even school and educational events, but, outside events, and extracurricular basketball games, soccer games, you name it. And so I think it's this balance all across the board that parents, are constantly faced with. And so again, how do we make these meetings, events, much more ease of access for these parents. I would say, utilizing, what we have technology wise, Zooms, that has worked best for me and, my program and some of our other programs that work with, outside participants, being able to just move to Zoom as a way to, best accommodate participants, or to be able to best get them information. But yes, just, utilizing what we have, technology, Zooms, things like that.
Beautiful. I don't think anything came in through the chat. So my last question before we move on to additional resources and upcoming events would be, what book would you recommend for shared reading between a parent and child, specifically a father and child? Or what has been a really treasured book for you in your parenting journey since you both have been in that role before? And I'm so sorry to throw this curveball at you. I know it's the worst
All
question
right.
to ask at the end of a session like this.
Um,
I got one.
Beautiful.
I really loved a book called Owl Moon. And it's just the story. It's a big picture book, but it works for many ages. It's a big story about it's actually a dad and his child going out on a snowy night, and looking for owls. And there are enough visuals that it works for younger readers or early readers, and older ones. It's a very lovely story, and it really talks. I think it really focuses on the adventure that um, uh, that this dad and child go on together. It's a lovely book. So
Yeah, similar. I would say, and I would say, and I picked this book because it was a book that I came across within my early days of coming into Center for Literacy, and we were really big on book giveaways and book drives and those type of events. And I came across this book called My Dad and Me,
mm,
and it was I can't remember the author, but it was a book that I utilized throughout all my trainings. But as well as, with my son, with my youngest son. And I remember it being, within the same content about a father, his journey throughout fatherhood, but he would take his child around the community and help his child just identify things within the community and help him shape the world and the things that he was seeing around him. And I found that to be so important. And I also found that to be very, very true is children really do learn through their community and through just being outside and the things that they see and how they interpret the world. And I started to incorporate that into my parenting and how I would help, my youngest child learn. And so I would take him out, ride the train, take him around the city, and just help him shape what he learned. And so that book, it all falls that all came from that book. So I
Beautiful.
like that book.
Incredible. And I think that, like, I studied human development and family science. I studied families really intensively in my undergraduate program. And what always like resonated with me early on in my degree was when a child like falls and they get hurt, they look to their caregivers specifically to kind of understand how they should react in those situations. And I think that it goes beyond just like an incident like that. And I think this whole thing of just like looking to their caregivers, it's such an integral part of early childhood. And I think that it was really important for us to have this conversation today. So thank you both so much for your time today.
you're welcome.
I do have a few resources to share with the audience before we depart. So as we've kind of referenced throughout, I have all of the references that Michael as well as Dr. Garfield had referenced. They have been shared in the chat if there's anything that you'd like to look into a little bit further. But then also I'd like to share we have a few things coming down the pike in terms of reach out and read content upcoming. So we have some virtual content coming up starting with March 20th. We have our early childhood development and mental health in the context of immigration webinar, as well as our effects of ACEs on early relational health and clinic considerations webinar on April 7th. Both of those will be CME accredited webinars. And then all of these are listed on our website under the events page. We have a few listening sessions coming up both on April 27th and June 15th, and then our final webinar of the June 30th deadline that we're looking at now is May 11th, and that'll be a continuation of the conversation we started back in March of last year on how to interact with neurodiverse children and really ensure that they get all of the things that they need, because interacting with them can be a little different than interacting with a neurotypical child. So that first session was on reading with neurodiverse children, and this next session will be on play, connect, and grow with those children. But thank you again so much for your time today. Thank you to everyone who was able to attend. We really appreciate your continued involvement in the Reach Out and Read program and having these conversations that really shape the work that we do and the way that we look at the work that we do and how important it is in early childhood, because it is important, and it is important that we center these kinds of differing approaches to what we may have traditionally been told is important in early childhood. So again, thank you both so much for your time, and thank you to everyone who was able to attend. This session has been recorded and will be uploaded to our website later this afternoon or tomorrow. So if you have anyone you'd like to refer back to this session, please encourage them to view the recording. But again, thank you so much, and enjoy the rest of your day.
Thank you all.